You know what's funny? Most people think millionaires are created in moments of excitement, big ideas, flashy startups, that one lucky break where everything suddenly explodes overnight. But when you actually pay attention, like really pay attention, you start noticing something else entirely. The people who end up wealthy don't usually look busy. They don't talk loudly about their plans. They don't rush to tell you what they're building. Half the time, they almost seem boring. They own companies you barely notice. They do work nobody brags about. And they keep doing it long after everyone else gets distracted. And that pattern hasn't changed. Not in 2006. Not in 2016. And definitely not heading into 2026. If anything, it's becoming clearer. Because the louder the internet gets, the more AI, trends, hustle culture, overnight success stories, the more valuable boring becomes. Not boring as in pointless. Boring as in stable, repeatable, needed, and quietly profitable. So instead of trying to impress anyone today, let's just talk honestly, like two people sitting somewhere calm, watching life go by, and noticing how money actually gets made. Not fast money. Not lottery money. But the kind of money that pays for peace later. The pattern nobody talks about. Here's the thing most people don't want to admit. We don't really want to be rich. We want to feel safe. We want to know that if something breaks, we can fix it. If someone gets sick, we can slow down. If we stop working tomorrow, life doesn't collapse. And the businesses that deliver that feeling, they're almost never exciting. They're predictable. They're repetitive. They deal with problems that never go away. That's why when you zoom out, you start seeing the same types of businesses quietly creating wealth, decade after decade, regardless of technology, politics, or trends. Let's talk through them slowly, like we're thinking out loud together. The first kind of boring, businesses built around messes. There's a certain type of work that never gets glamorized. It's dirty. It's inconvenient. It's the kind of thing people don't think about unless it stops working. And the moment it stops working, they'll pay almost anything to make the problem disappear. I'm talking about businesses built around messes. Plumbing, drain cleaning, septic systems, waste removal, industrial cleaning, grease traps, restoration after water damage. None of this sounds exciting, but that's exactly the point. Because humans will always create messes. Homes will always flood. Pipes will always burst at the worst possible moment. Restaurants will always clog drains. Cities will always produce waste. And in 2026, with aging infrastructure and more buildings than ever, these problems aren't shrinking. They're multiplying. What's interesting is who doesn't want these businesses. Most people want something that feels creative. Something they can show off. Something that sounds impressive at dinner. So they ignore this entire category. Meanwhile, the people who step into it quietly realize something. Nobody negotiates when their bathroom is flooding at 2 a.m. They don't price shops. They don't ask for a discount. They just want it fixed. That's a powerful place to stand. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's dependable. And over time, dependable turns into something beautiful. Predictable cash flow. Repeat customers. Referrals without advertising. And eventually, freedom. Not overnight freedom, but the kind that sneaks up on you. The second kind of boring, maintenance that never ends. There's another kind of business that doesn't feel exciting at first glance. It doesn't solve emergencies. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't scale into a billion-dollar unicorn. It just keeps things running. Think about everything in your life that needs regular attention just to stay functional. Lawns, HVAC systems, elevators, roofs, commercial buildings, parking lots, factories, apartment complexes. None of these things fix themselves, and none of them can be ignored for long. Maintenance businesses are fascinating because they flip how most people think about income. Instead of constantly chasing new customers, they build relationships. Contracts, monthly retainers, scheduled work. You show up, you do the job, you invoice, you repeat, year after year. And here's what most outsiders miss. Once you're embedded in someone's maintenance cycle, you're very hard to replace. Switching providers feels risky. People stick with what works, especially when the alternative is disruption. In 2026, this becomes even more valuable. Why? Because fewer people want hands-on work. Fewer young workers are entering the trades, and the systems themselves are getting more complex. That means the people who do show up reliably become indispensable. Not famous, not flashy, but quietly booked months in advance. The third kind of boring, businesses that serve. Aging reality. This one isn't fun to think about, but it's real. People are getting older. Populations are aging. And with age comes a very specific set of needs. Not luxury needs, practical ones. Home modifications, mobility equipment, in-home care, medical transport, meal preparation, property management for seniors, assisted living support services. These businesses don't feel innovative. They don't feel sexy. They don't appeal to ego. But they align perfectly with reality. And reality doesn't care about trends. What makes this category so powerful is emotional gravity. When families are involved, decisions aren't delayed. They're made carefully and then stuck with. If you help someone's parents live safely, if you reduce stress during a vulnerable time, you're not just a service provider anymore. You're trusted, and trust compounds. In 2026, with longer lifespans and stretched healthcare systems, this space quietly expands not because of hype, but because there's no alternative. Someone has to do the work. Someone has to care. Someone has to manage the details. And the people who step into that role calmly, professionally, humanly, often find themselves financially stable long before they expected. The fourth kind of boring, logistics nobody notices. Here's a strange truth. Most of modern life depends on systems we never think about. Until they stop. Goods don't magically appear. Trash doesn't disappear. Inventory doesn't manage itself. Warehouses don't organize themselves. Behind every product, there's a chain. Behind every delivery, there's coordination. Behind every smooth experience, there's logistics. Businesses that live in this space tend to sound dull. Local distribution, fleet maintenance, warehousing, fulfillment, cold storage, inventory management, last mile delivery for unsexy products. Nobody brags about owning a logistics company, but many of the wealthiest people you'll never hear about do. Why? Because when things move, money moves. And when businesses rely on you to keep their operations running, you become part of their foundation. In 2026, with more e-commerce, more fragmentation, and more demand for speed and reliability, these quiet operators become even more valuable. They're not chasing consumers, they're serving businesses. And B2B money behaves differently. It's calmer, larger, more consistent. The fifth kind of boring, compliance and paperwork nobody wants. This might be the most invisible path of all. Paperwork, regulations, compliance, licensing, reporting, insurance administration, tax prep for small businesses, payroll processing, safety audits. These aren't problems people enjoy solving, but they must be solved. And here's the secret. As systems get more complex, the pain of getting it wrong increases. Fines, shutdowns, legal trouble, lost licenses. So people gladly outsource this work to someone who understands it and removes anxiety from their life. This kind of business doesn't explode. It accumulates. Slowly, quietly, reliably. Clients stay for years. They refer to others. They rarely argue about price. Because peace of mind is hard to replace. In 2026, when rules continue to change and small businesses feel overwhelmed, the people who say, "I'll handle that," become invaluable. The sixth kind of boring, everyday human needs. Finally, there's the category that almost feels too simple. Food, shelter, clothing, health, movement, connection, not trends, needs. Businesses that revolve around these basics often feel unremarkable. Local food production, wholesale ingredients, affordable housing services, repair businesses, basic healthcare services, community-focused gyms, physical therapy, childcare. None of this screams get rich. But these businesses survive recessions. They survive tech shifts. They survive attention cycles. Because people don't stop needing them. And in 2026, as people become more tired of noise and more focused on sustainability, these grounded businesses quietly strengthen. They're not exciting to start, but they're comforting to own. Why these businesses actually work. Here's the part nobody likes to hear. These businesses succeed not because they're clever, but because they're patient. They don't rely on virality. They don't depend on luck. They don't need perfect timing. They rely on showing up, doing the work, and staying when others leave. Most people underestimate how powerful that is. Because boredom scares us. We're taught that if something feels boring, it must be wrong. That excitement equals progress. That quiet equals stagnation. But in reality, boredom often just means you're no longer gambling. You're building. And building feels slow. Until one day you look up and realize life feels lighter. Bills don't scare you. Time feels like it belongs to you again. When you step back and really look at these businesses, none of them promise excitement, none of them sell a fantasy, and none of them pretend to turn life into a highlight reel. Instead, they offer something much rarer: steadiness. And as strange as it sounds, steadiness is what most people are actually searching for beneath all the noise. Not yachts, not fame, not endless hustle. Just the ability to move through life without constantly bracing for impact. These boring businesses matter because they mirror real life. Pipes will break, parents will age, paperwork will pile up, goods will need to move, buildings will need care, people will still need food, safety, and support. None of that disappears in 2026. If anything, it becomes more obvious. There's a quiet comfort in realizing that wealth doesn't have to come from chasing trends or reinventing yourself every 5 years. It can come from choosing something simple, learning it deeply, and staying with it long enough for trust and competence to compound. For retirement especially, this perspective changes everything. Instead of imagining some dramatic finish line where you suddenly make it, these businesses allow wealth to grow alongside life steadily, almost unnoticed. One day you realize you're not worried anymore, not because you're rich in a flashy way, but because your foundation is solid. And that's the real takeaway here. Not that boring businesses are magical. Not that success is guaranteed. But that calm, useful work done consistently has a way of taking care of you later. There's no rush to decide anything. No pressure to start tomorrow. Just the reassurance that if you choose practicality over excitement and patience over hype, you're not falling behind. You're quietly moving toward a life with fewer sharp edges. And that kind of peace is worth more than most people ever admit. Thanks for watching.